good times create weak men. We're definitely in that phase right now. It is kind of grotesque to me to see how governments will exploit an opportunity after a major tragedy like this happens. The politicians are going to go in, exploit the hell out of this. They are highly effective at manipulating the elbows up crowd, which is evidenced again by the results of the last election. A cockroach survives an atomic bomb, and this is pretty much the Liberal Party. I mean, the most hated government in my lifetime. I've got a very, very close eye on separation. If this referendum doesn't happen, it's because the politicians have once again proven to the public they believe they're kings and queens lording over the people that vote them into those jobs. This is the world we live in. We shouldn't have to live like that. Just accept that this is the way we have to live and plan accordingly. Protect yourself.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
We've never taken our homeland security seriously. What happens to Canada in a cyber attack or any other major event? We would be completely screwed. I just don't think that this government can rise to the challenge.
On the topic of how you said that the government tends to make things worse, of course, we had that tragedy unfold in Tumbler Ridge a few days ago, and it seems like that could have been prevented. It seems like that didn't have to happen, that it was on some level the incompetency of either clinicians or the RCMP, we don't know all the details yet, so I don't want to completely pass judgment, but it seems as though they dropped the ball on that one clearly. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, in the typical anarcho-tyrannical fashion, they're coming after the law-abiding people, restricting, more of their freedoms so that these crazy people that we're giving the guns back to don't lash out again.
It is kind of grotesque to me to see how often governments will exploit an opportunity for their own pre-established agenda. Like, they literally are, this is their predictable second act after a major tragedy like this happens. The politicians are going to go in, exploit the hell out of this. And, as a public, we should be measuring the activity of the government, in looking at the outcomes of the policies that they're trying to enact and saying, hey, was that actually effective in preventing this? No. But you see the government, they're just running around doing all this liability management in a sense, and they're transferring the blame and the risk onto somebody that they already had a predefined script for. We're just waiting to say the old line of, our thoughts and prayers for the families and the platitudes,
Right.
This line of conversation always comes up after one of these tragedies gets exploited by politicians and the media. And I fully agree with you. And in my view, even to be a little bit more bold than what you're saying, like I'm actually willing to at this point say that all the indicators were there. Everything was there. And I mean, if you look at, so years ago, I was posted to a reserve unit in the Niagara region. And as a lot of reserve units actually do high school co-op courses. So you come for a semester, you're a soldier in the morning and a student in the afternoon. But because of that, I got to participate in the level 1 and level 2 threat assessment training with a guy named Kevin Cameron. I believe his office is in Tabor, Alberta. And he's, there's lots of people that do this, lots of psychologists, professionals that do threat assessment training for school boards. Okay, so this is nothing new. I've even got my own sort of strange experience with somebody that I identified as a threat to me. So after I retired from the Army, I was back in software school for 4 years. I had an incident with a particular student. I notified security of the school because this guy was meeting certain criteria with me. And I was told by the school, yeah, we've done the training with Kevin. So, I mean, this is something that school boards do. Now, Kevin is a guy that goes around, he trains school boards on how to do threat assessments and come up with their own protocols to identify potential active shooters. Okay, so this mental health science and these protocols have been around for decades now, since, after Columbine.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the issues, and I because I know what keeps popping up now is the difference between, a heterosexual, I'll phrase it that way, a heterosexual active shooter versus, we've got a couple examples now of a trans person as an active shooter. Okay, so there are a couple of minor differences, and I want to kind of talk about policy from a perspective on this as to why all of the indicators were missed. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all 7 of the sort of steps that an individual goes through on the pathway to violence, because it's a pathway and there are 7 steps to it. But the first one is grievance. Okay, a person who becomes an active shooter, and by the way, because they didn't go Columbine today, doesn't mean that in the future they're not going to go postal as adults in the workforce, right? So this is important stuff, and this is something that I've read about and researched and studied for years, because I have kids in the school system, and I want to know about this stuff. But when we look at sort of the first step to this, which is the grievance step, you've always had bullying. I mean, bullying existed when I went to school, back in the 70s. And, bullying is a major contributing factor to this whole dynamic of active shooters. But it is the first stage. This is where the grievance is hardened. But you go through some of the other stages, and really, the 5th stage is leakage. And so what you were kind of alluding to with the RCMP and other people, every instance of an active shooter, they were leaking through social media, through family, through friends. They were making statements that was leaking the point on the pathway to violence that they were on. And so the fact that the RCMP had been involved in this individual, mental health had been involved with this individual, the leakage was all there. The signs were all there. And I'm willing to bet that everybody who was directly involved in this person, after hearing the news of this individual, were not even remotely surprised. And that speaks volumes, right? Because there's actually a saying, and this is what Kevin Cameron says in his threat assessment training: violence is an evolutionary process. Nobody just snaps. And that's true. You're on a pathway to violence. You didn't just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to go be an active shooter and a mass murderer because I woke up and I snapped. Violence is an evolutionary process. Nobody just snaps. And so there's all this evidence now that we're learning that this guy was leaking all sorts of signals to everybody around him that he was going to go and do this. And I'm not a psychologist, but I do read about this. I've studied this stuff for 18 years, not at an expert level, but at an elementary, let's say, more than average educated on this particular topic. My thesis right now is that because this person was identifying as a transgender person, the people that were charged with looking at the pathway were probably biased against actually initiating their protocols, because they didn't want to, the protocols were probably politicized.
Right. They're being overly sensitive as opposed to, seeing the warning signs for what they were.
Yeah. And that's kind of where my thesis is right now with this particular incident and the previous one that we know about with a transgender. And again, then there was now a third one that I'm aware of that happened just in the same time, where he, I think, killed his family at a hockey game or in an arena. Right. So and it's harder for adults because adults are not in the school system. Right. Whereas students there are supposed adult supervision. But we have this really weird thing that is happening in the gender ideology happening in the schools right now. We have this dynamic. It's actually policy. And I read this for the Niagara Regional School Board policy, that you exclude the parents from transitioning your child unless the child consents or it's viewed as need to know. The parent is need to know. Okay. So what that means as a policy, we are deliberately assuming that the parent is a direct threat to the health and safety of their own child within this policy. So if my child showed up to school drunk or on drugs or got into a fight, I would be immediately notified. But in the case of assisting my child in medically transitioning to a different gender, I am assumed to be a direct threat to the safety and well-being of my only child or of my child. And so therefore the policy is to exclude me unless the kid says they can tell me. Right? This is very, very twisted, because when we go back to these 7 steps or we look at the pathway to violence, we need the parents to be involved. We need them to be involved to get on the pathway and to get the kid off the pathway. We need that relationship with the families. And so what I find really bizarre about this whole thing is, like, if you go back to the whole, let's exclude, or as a policy, we're going to basically lie to the parents and exclude them from the whole decision making about transitioning. Used to be, kid shows up to school with a black eye, or there's indications that there's something going on at the home. The school would have had a policy or a protocol for domestic abuse of that child in the school. And so they would have initiated some sort of a protocol to maybe intervene and make sure that that kid's okay at home. But we've done the exact opposite with kids that are, identify as transgender kids. We are automatically assuming that the parents are guilty of being a threat to the child. Okay, so therefore we cut them out. In my view, this whole gender ideology is a family problem. The family should be given supports. The family should be given help. You don't isolate the parents from the child and just give the kid help, because when that whole thing breaks down and fails and that kid realizes they've been duped, you now put them on a different pathway. You might be putting that kid on a pathway to violence now. And so this whole ideology, in my view, literally puts the kids onto that pathway, because under regular bullying, what it is, it's saying, hey, there are exits to this condition I'm facing every day at school. But when it's the gender ideology stuff, it is more now, oh, they don't accept me. There's no exit to this scenario that I'm living in my life. They don't accept me as who I am. And now the adults are fighting over, terminology and all that kind of stuff. So now for me, where do I sit on this thing? And so now it starts to build and harden the grievance phase for that individual. So my prediction is, unless the schools or the system starts to course correct, you're going to see more of this violence. And it's going to come, I think, from this ideology community. I think you're going to see more of it increase, not less of it. I think we got to get our act together as responsible adults and stop harming these children.
It's definitely a cultural problem. I think it starts in the home at the parenting level. There's a multitude of factors that probably go into why people are so sensitive and why they're not navigating that environment that's always existed with bullies in a way that is, adaptive. Just so people are clear, because oftentimes, anytime you bring up this at all, the claim is that you're being hateful. And in my view, I'm perfectly okay looking at this as a strictly mental health issue. Aside the ongoing debate about when a kid should be allowed to transition, or which I'm probably on board with you 100%, but it's very difficult for them to not just blame the gun if you do keep the conversation focused, because mental health encompasses all of that gender dysphoria or whatever. Yeah, so it's easy to fall into that trap of using the language that they want you to use so that they can just blame this on guns and take people's rights away and never address the underlying problem. And as a parent, I don't want this to be a problem. Like, I'm genuinely concerned to send my kids to school now, which is crazy to think. And I don't think any parent should have to have that feeling. Obviously, what we're doing is is not the appropriate way to minimize and mitigate the threat in the future. And so if we continue down this pathway and if nothing fundamentally changes, then like you said, I think we're going to see more and more of these events, and there will be pushback. Hopefully that happens at a local level. Like hopefully, the provinces or the municipalities take it upon themselves to start addressing these underlying issues, like you said, and really, I mean, something needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
This is...
I think we're doing a disservice when we're, running around acting as, we start off as helicopter parents. Now we become bulldozer parents, which is a term that I first heard from David Redman in this idea that we are removing adversity from the lives of our children, right? By taking away adversity, we rob them of the ability to build their confidence that they can take care of themselves. In my day as a kid in elementary school, I got into fistfights all the time, and my dad didn't go rushing into the school. What he did is he put me in judo and put me in karate. And he said, you have to solve this problem. I'm not going to intervene for you. You have to learn these skills in life. And so I think, we are bulldozer parents. And what that really means is we push everybody out of the way to protect our children and make sure we're bulldozing adversity in their lives. And that's fundamentally wrong. And we do it. And in my view, get them out of public school if you can. If you're in a position, get them out of public school.
Contrary to popular belief, in the apocalypse, most people aren't going to die by the hands of marauders. In fact, you're probably going to die from disease. This is why you need antibiotics. The problem is, getting them requires a prescription. Well, today's sponsor is Jace Medical. They've created a revolutionary service that allows you to get prescription medications like antibiotics with relative ease, hassle-free. This will be worth more than gold in an emergency for somebody who needs them. So do yourself a favor and take your prepping to the next level while you still can. Check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a kind of parent, like I want the teacher to be more disciplinary, not to the extent of physically assaulting the kid, but I want them to be disciplined. I look at these Chinese kids in classrooms and they're all well behaved. They're paying attention, they're respecting the teacher, and that's how it should be. But I had an experience with one of the teachers, and it was just like, trying to coax the kids into listening by bringing his PlayStation 3 or whatever it was at the time, PlayStation 4, and giving them fidget spinners and sort of pandering to that impulsivity and restlessness at that age, when the point is to, not only to teach kids from an educational point of view, but also teach them how to act, teach them how to behave. And a lot of that does start in the home. Like, I take very seriously just showing respect, having manners, things like that. And I just find nowadays that that's a lost art with a lot of parents. And we do, as parents, as Canadian parents, we do bear a significant portion of the responsibility for that. And it's unfortunate because this is going to lead to a real crisis. I mean, it is. This was a defining moment, unfortunately, in this downward spiral that we're in culturally. And I don't know, man. It's unfortunate because at the same time, you want your kids to have that experience of being surrounded by people, learning, as you say, evolving, learning how to manage those difficult situations. But you're worried that they're going to get shot up because the system allowed somebody to get to the level where, they got to.
Yeah. Like when I went back to software school, I had left the army and, had a 300 person staff and a $50 million budget. And 5 weeks later, I was sitting in a classroom and my new peer group were a bunch of 17, 18-year-old kids that still lived at home with their parents, and, I remember going into classes, and it's just at this point, it's instinct for a guy like me. I'm sure it is for you. Like when I go to the mall with my family, I'm not taking a casual stroll through the mall. When I'm in a public place with my family, I'm always at a condition level, yellow, and I'm basically a dog on the leash. I'm not there for enjoyment. I'm there for protection. But when I went back to software school, every classroom that I walked into, I was looking around going, okay, where's my best fighting chance? I just naturally, I assessed every student in the class. And after a while, I'm like, okay, you, and you're the ones I'm going to call on to do what I want you to do if there's an active shooter situation in this school. And that's unfortunately the way my mind has evolved, into adulthood. I think about those things. Unfortunately, modern day schools are not designed to cater to active shooters. In fact, they're just, fish in a pond, unfortunately, or fish in a barrel. But, I remember in my first year of school in America, they had an active shooter situation happen at a university in the first month of the year. And so these things do happen, but we're not training people to walk into class and go, oh, yeah, like I might get shot today.
Right.
We should, schools do drills. They do active shooter drills now. But I would say that the infrastructure is wholly inadequate to deal with a real scenario. And I don't think that the teachers are really properly trained to deal with that, nor should they be. I'm happy to see that the police have finally come up with good procedures. Unfortunately, they have a lot of data, a lot of lesson learned. But this is the world we live in. Don't really focus on, we shouldn't have to live like that. Just accept that this is the way we have to live and plan accordingly. Protect yourself.
This is it happening in a benign, small scale event. I can only imagine what happens in a large scale event when things are bad everywhere. And then you have people who have been brought up in suboptimal mannerisms. We've just done people such a disservice in terms of their upbringing, and what the result of that is going to be if there's a widespread emergency. It's just going to be total chaos when you take away the drugs and they're put in a situation where they're forced to actually have a little bit of adversity in their life. Most are not going to be able to deal with that sort of pressure, and it might even create an outlet for more violence, as typically peaceful protests or protests can be co-opted by violent individuals. In that kind of environment where the police can't come, are things going to be much, much worse is one of my concerns as a prepper. So yeah, we're entering some very dark times, unfortunately. So what do you think? I know last time we spoke about the protocols that people can follow and running the drills and all that stuff. If people want, I'll post a link to our original talk in the description below. But what are some other things that you think, and just in general, as a refresher here, in terms of the most overlooked preparedness elements for families?
I think the biggest thing that people believe or maybe have this perception of is that it's a lone wolf type of a scenario. And from my perspective, and nobody has to agree or not, but from my perspective, there's a reason that wolves travel in packs. And, I think that now is the time to start building your pack. And, I've had groups that have reached out to me now. They're saying, hey, I've got a small group and we want to take your book and start doing planning based off of your book for our group. And I think that's a great idea. I really do think, I've converted the book now. I'm almost done, not fully there, but I've converted the book into a web application. The goal is to follow the process of the book, print off your contingency plans, put them in a binder in case the power goes out. You've got the plan. And I've got that, in the works. It's almost ready to go, but I'm hoping that people take that plan, form their group, and start building out their community level plans. There's the individual. I mean, armies don't operate as individuals. Special operations don't do it as individuals. So why does the public think that in a real prepper emergency, oh, I'm going to do it all myself? Right? Build your community. Start looking for people that have skills that you're lacking, and add those to your group. This doesn't have to be motivated by fear. This should be motivated by, I want to just feel confident and secure. I mean, you're a perfect example. You've taken every aspect of your life and you've put space between yourself, your family, and reliance on the system itself. Okay. The further you can get away from relying on the for food and for water and for protection, the more confident you should be and the happier you should probably be as well. Knowing that no matter what the scenario is, I can feed myself, protect myself, and have a community and still build the social aspect into all of this. And ultimately, I can protect my kids, because that's really my wife and kids for us, men, and mothers and wives. So I think ultimately people at this point, I would strongly advocate, start building your community, your wolf pack. I think that's a critical thing. And I think people are too fascinated with the bug out bag as opposed to building out their wolf pack. Bug out bags are great. I totally agree. They're necessities, but they're not the only thing. Build your community, get the people in the community that have the skills that you need to thrive, and then start working towards that.
The lone wolf mentality is definitely a consequence of our individualistic society. They don't really have that mentality in collectivist societies. I was talking with, Professor Zhang. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yep.
He was saying, in China, they have a much different approach to preparedness. It's a much more community-oriented procedure, and that might be too far for a lot of people in the Western mind to
Yes.
comprehend or want to sign on to. But there's also a certain resilience there as well that, like you say, you can't be a jack of all trades. I think one of the best points, I'm sure there's many in your book, but is to have a drill, go through the entire process of what they call it visualization in sports, but where you imagine what scenario might unfold and how you would deal with that situation, and run actual drills so that it becomes rote and second nature. Obviously, it's not going to become second nature without a lot of training, but it will give you a pathway, a neural pathway in that moment of crisis that you can easily kind of jump into. If it ever does happen, you have you've kind of already been there somewhat. So it's not a completely foreign experience that causes some kind of paralysis or whatever. If you could change one emergency management policy in Canada, or if you could advise the government, knowing the state of the world today, what are one or some of the things that you might advise them to do?
Oh, it's such a great question. And I think ultimately it comes back to maybe the answer is a marketing and advertising type of an answer to this. Start putting out commercials, start advertising to the public that you, John Q. Public, are responsible for the first 72 hours up to a week long of your own safety, sustainment, and maybe even recovery in the first week. So this is not about, let's say the negative connotation of being a doomsday prepper. That's not what we're talking about. It's convey to the public that you're responsible for yourself for the first, let's say, up to a week, to give us time to get shaken out and come and help you with you and your family, your situation. But you have to take responsibility. You can't just hoist it all onto the government and think, hey, I pay my taxes, they'll come and save me. No, you have to take it seriously. You're responsible. That's what being an adult is. But I don't think that we take that seriously as enough as a society. Maybe the place to teach this is in education. I don't know, but I would definitely say that the public, we're at that stage of, good times make or create weak men. We're definitely in that phase right now, and
Absolutely.
I really do think that the public has to start changing their mindset and realize that they're responsible for the first, I would say, full week of an emergency.
Yeah,
And
at least. Yeah.
at least,
Yeah.
yeah.
I've seen the attempts in Europe to try to do that sort of thing. With NATO, they had an initiative recently where they were trying to get people to create a bug out bag, and it was, I don't know, it kind of came off as a little inauthentic and cringy in some ways. They try to make light of the issue in a way because they don't want to scare people either. Like they have to walk that fine line of, we don't want to panic the population. But then a part of me, we've been talking about this from the perspective of incompetence, but there's also the theory that, well, maybe there's actually a nefarious intent here somewhere, that they really want people to just be dumbed down, dependent on the government so they can be more easily controlled and manipulated. And if that's the case, maybe they don't want to tell people to go out and be self-reliant because that puts more space, like you said, between us and them. And it kind of goes against the trend towards promoting dependency on the system, for lack of a better term. If you tell people to get prepared, like what you're saying, 72 hours, though, that shouldn't pose a threat to that. And there's plenty of ways. I mean, I can think of 1,000 ways where you could market that to people in a way that they would be hip and receptive to, in a way that would address the visceral fears or motivations they might have without causing a panic and a run on the stores. There's a way you could do it in a way that was very effective, I think. I wouldn't trust government think tanks to do that because they're just so out of touch with people. They would have to consult with real people, especially influencers, I think, to get ideas about how do you get that message across. And I would be more than willing to help them out with that, because I could get people prepping in probably a few weeks if you gave me all the resources, and there's easy ways to do it, I think. Maybe I'm underestimating the depth of the conditioning to the contrary, but I think it wouldn't take much to at least get people started.
Yeah. And I think, training courses and stuff like that, the summer that just passed, I went to the weekend long preppers meet, was an event here in Ontario.
Oh, yeah.
Tracy Wilson from the CCFR was there.
Yeah.
And other groups, that were all participating in that. Even on my website now that I have, you can go in there, and I've converted the book into a training course, a 1-day training course. Where the goal is you walk out with at least one almost fully prepared contingency plan for whatever ranks the highest on your threat matrix. So that's on the website that you can go, and if you want to book me for the day with your group, minimum 10 people. I've had other people reach out and say, hey, can you just come and train the group? And, I've done that as well up in northern parts of the province. So there are resources out there for people to go and do to get more advanced knowledge on preparedness. But in my view, it always comes back to planning and having a written plan that's in a binder, that it's not like you're sitting around going, oh, I hope I get to execute my plan. But in the middle of an SHTF, it's too late to write the plan. Now you're just winging it, and you're terrified. And now you're dealing with your heart rate, diminished cognitive capabilities, lack of sleep, lack of proper nutrition, and you're trying to make it up as you go. That's the wrong time. You need a written, honest plan. And, one of my favorite parts of the book is the chapter on wargaming. And the reason I really like it is because for husbands and wives, it's the same thing that we do all the time. We argue back and forth with our wives. If you do this, well, I'm going to do that. Okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. That's all a war game is for your plan, and I think that people should be able to break down the various stages of what their plan is going to be and go back and forth and have that. One person is like, this is the first thing I'm going to do. The other person says, well, the way I'm going to disrupt that, devil's advocate or screw you over if you do that, is I'm going to do this. And then you get to say, okay, fine, I'll be looking for it. And if you do it, this is how I'm going to counter that. So my favorite part of the book is actually the war game piece. And that's what I spent a lot of time on the new web application I'm building to capture all that, to make sure that each piece is thoroughly thought out. So that now what you're doing is you're literally executing your plan. You just print off your decision support template. It's a piece of paper. You look at it and say, in each phase of the plan, this is what I should be doing, and this is what I should be looking out for. I'd rather do that than try to wing it in an environment where I haven't even considered what my options are, or understood really what my threats are.
And I think this is fairly advanced level stuff when you think about it in terms of preparedness. When most people in the beehives, as you say, aren't even thinking about the bare essentials. They don't even have, from a consumerist kind of point of view. And even though I think 72 hours is not nearly long enough, I understand why you have to see it from the perspective of a normie, something they can kind of wrap their heads around, something that's achievable. So you get them started on the consumerist level, you check all these boxes, then hopefully they kind of continue down that pathway and get into, more advanced levels of contingency planning, as you're talking about.
Yeah. And when I've presented on this in other places, I do get the sense that there are people that come up and they're like, it's been in the back of my mind. I've been thinking about it. I just never did anything. It seemed to be too overwhelming for me. So there are a lot of normies that do think about it, but they just, it's like, I'm going to stick my head in the sand and I'm going to ignore the problem. And then there are other people that are like, maybe I should just get a book. And I think sometimes the impression is they look through it and go, that's overwhelming. Put it on the shelf. If there's an emergency, I'll pull out and use it at that time. It's like, you're kind of late to the party, but let's just celebrate the fact that you showed up at all.
You've probably come across these emergency food buckets. Most people buy them, put them in the closet, never actually eat them. The problem is they really don't taste good. When morale is already low, you don't want your family subsisting off of dog food. There's a much better and more wholesome alternative. You want some freeze-dried Alaskan king crab that can last 25 years? How about some turkey breast? How about some roast beef? The #1 emergency food company in America, without exceptions, is Wholesale Freeze Dryers. Go through the link in the description for 15% off.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of it is political because there's a certain culture that comes with preparedness that is often associated with the right. Yes. And so this creates like a knee-jerk reaction from the left to anything that is, oh, you want to grow your own garden, which seems crazy because that used to be the hippie thing to do. Well, you want to live outside the city and you want to shoot guns and you want to take your kids out of school and you believe in a nuclear traditional family. And, so there's this, it's kind of anathema to people who are of not even a radical sort, but it's just been deeply ingrained into just the average, leftist person. I mean, I went all through academia, so I know the type. Looking at this from their perspective, they're immediately thinking about it from a political point of view. And you almost have to, now you're seeing because of ICE, right? People are starting to become, the left is militarizing now in the United States, maybe not for the best of reasons. I don't know, maybe there's an argument to be made there. I mean, I don't like the feds coming in and doing anything. I'd rather you leave that to local law enforcement. I'm just an anti-Fed person in general. So I don't care if it's ICE or the government in any manner that they might present themselves. But So, yeah, I think there is going to be those sticking points with a lot of people, unfortunately. That's why I try to make my channel accessible to everybody. I've violated a lot of my own rules as of late. I've been speaking out a bit more openly, perhaps a little too outspoken on certain issues. And I always try to encourage people to be moving targets this day and age. And I've kind of violated my own rules, but I think that's a sign of how bad things are getting, that now I'm even getting political, which is, you know, I understand the importance of doing so, but there's also a lot of potential pitfalls as well.
I agree with your assessment on the left-leaning side of the political spectrum in terms of, you know, how people behave. And my actual concern is just as much on the right-leaning side of the political spectrum. And I'll give you this example from a political point of view. Since the creation of Canada in 1867, there's been one Liberal Party of Canada. Today, we're on the 5th iteration of Conservatives. And if you count sort of the 6th Conservative National Party that's never been elected. So my observation from now participating in the convoy, I'm active in politics at the provincial level and other things, right-leaning people on the political spectrum, they're very difficult to work with. You know, I'm the one advocating for build your pack, and it seems like the right side is more interested in being prepared and being independent, but they're incredibly difficult to work with. You know, and so that's a big challenge for me. It's like, okay, I know this group of people are more than likely to take this serious and be prepared, but my next biggest concern is, if there is an SHTF, am I going to be able to actually work with them long term? Right? Because it's a very much it's my way or the highway with the right side of the spectrum, and I'm taking my ball and I'm going to go home. And in this case, it's like I'm going to take my generator and I'm going home. You know, so that's a big concern that I have. So now I'm saying, okay, evaluate individuals, forget the politics if you can, just find out. And I do say this to people, go away. If you're building your pack, go away on a camping trip for a weekend with all the people you're contemplating being in your pack and see how they perform. Test them. Find out if they're reliable. Are they going to be there, or are they going to just, you know, the ant and the grasshopper? Are they going to be the grasshopper or the ant? So evaluate
and how they're gonna work with people, like how the politics is going to be decided, because I think that's one of the biggest, you know, people just assume that everybody's going to work together. But like you said, it's like herding cats, too many chiefs, right? I totally agree. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done by everybody, I guess. One question that I didn't ask you, and this is kind of, you know, going back a lot in terms of where we've gone in this conversation, but I thought I should ask you because it's a pressing issue for a lot of people out here in the West right now. And just quickly, what is your thoughts on the Alberta separatist movement? I understand the grievances. Do I think it's ever going to materialize? Is it my preference? No, but I totally understand it. And, you know, as an Easterner, you know, I guess, what is your perspective? What is the perspective of people out there? And, yeah, if you just maybe share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I know a lot of the people personally that are actively pursuing Alberta independence. So I want to be careful with the words. I don't want to say separation or whatever. It's Alberta independence. That's what people are really motivated by, is getting Ottawa out of their houses, out of their lives, and allowing the people of Alberta, the businesses of Alberta, and the taxpayers of Alberta to thrive economically and from a free perspective. So it's really they're motivated by the right to self-determination and independence and small government. And to me, I love all those things. I really do like that. Now, from a political point of view, my view on this whole issue is, are the politicians going to respect the will of the people and allow them to have a referendum? Are they going to allow the people to vote on their right to self-determination, or are they going to deny them that? To me, I don't really care about the outcome. of a referendum. What I care about is everything that leads to, and hopefully including the government having the respect for the citizens to ensure that the citizens get asked the question on independence. That to me is the crux of the issue. Because if this referendum doesn't happen, it's because the politicians have once again proven to the public that they don't work for the public, that they believe they're kings and queens and they're lording over or they're commanding the people that vote them into those jobs. So for me, that's the perspective that I take. I don't care about the outcome. I care about the steps that lead to the outcome. And so that is what is really fundamentally important to me. Do we live in a free and democratic society or not? And if we do, a referendum proves it or it disproves it. And I think the referendum capability or the doing a referendum proves to the public what kind of a society we truly, truly live in. That's why I've got a very, very close eye on separation. I mean, I'm in Ontario. We're not going anywhere. And the politics of a referendum on separation in Ontario is the calculus is just far too extreme.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Now, my concern, and I don't think it's a big concern, is that if Alberta does actually get the referendum, who's next? I do believe Saskatchewan will hold a plebiscite, and that question will get asked. Quebec will start to show its teeth on this issue. And then you've got the far eastern side of the country. Are they going to stay or are they going to join maybe the southern places? I'm not a big advocate at all for becoming an American state. I don't think that that's a wise move in any way. It's not, again, about separation. It's about independence. It's about being a sovereign person.
A lot of it is, especially becoming an American state, it's like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Agreed.
And I'm with you. I really like the framing there of independence, because I think all provinces should be more independent. And I think that would allow for Canada to thrive in many ways. And some of the hardline separatists might disagree with this point of view. But I think at the end of the day, this is a litmus test for the integrity of the democracy. But it's also, in the very least, what it's going to likely result in is the federal government backing off a little bit. They have to. Maybe this thing gains movement. Carney and his Liberal government, they're very good, and we've seen that when they pulled out Trudeau at the last minute, because they knew. They're very good at playing this sort of game where they'll give a little, take a little. So I think, unfortunately, for the hardline separatists, I think what's going to happen is this government will back off before it gets to that point. With Trudeau, the thing that I liked about it is that he pushed people so much that it forced a response. When the government overreach happens, like the truckers' convoy happened, right? But I think this government is a little bit more crafty. They're not going to allow themselves to kind of be on the opposing end of that would inflame those temperaments even more. I think they'll find a way to make some concessions, and then the people who are kind of on the fence about the issue, they'll say, "Oh, okay, well, it looks like the Liberals are making some concessions, so I won't sign the petition," or whatever. They'll do something. They're not as dumb as people think in certain ways when it comes to
I agree.
retaining power. They're pretty smart, and they're very strategic. They're not good at running government or business, but they are good at maintaining control, unfortunately.
I agree. And I mean, let's just really quickly look at the level of experience in terms of leadership. I think Justin Trudeau didn't do anything in his professional career before becoming the leader, the manager of the entire country, and look how crappy of a job he did. I look at Pierre Poilievre and I look at his resume and I'm like, you've been a career politician since 24. You've never run a company. You've never been a CEO. You've never had anyone bigger than your office staff working for you. Why are you qualified all of a sudden to be given the keys to the entire country? At least with Mark Carney, and I'm not advocating for the guy because I can't stand him, but look at the resume that the guy's got. And I think what he's done is he's instilled probably more discipline within the liberal leadership right now. He's more palatable to the public. Like, hey, look at the results of the last election. But also they are highly, highly effective at manipulating the opinions of the elbows up crowd, which is evidenced again by the results of the last election. Right. So they're very, very crafty that way. And they're great. You know, a cockroach survives an atomic bomb. And, you know, this is pretty much the Liberal Party. I mean, the most hated government in
That's the
my lifetime.
perfect metaphor. I don't think I've ever heard something that good. You know, that said, though, I would still prefer Pierre, just so people are clear, because he would at least get our guns, at least kick that can down the road a little bit. That's just myself personally. I don't know how you feel about it, but you know, I think,
either way, I don't think life for Tom Marazzo improves or diminishes either way, whether it's the Conservatives or the Liberals. Truthfully, that's just my feeling.
We were recently talking about, you know, the division amongst Conservatives and stuff like that, and how there's a lot of hardliners in there who would like, you know, an aggressive kind of NRA, like pro 2A sort of approach to this. And then you have the CCFR, which is bringing this more amicable approach where it's, okay, we're for licensing, we're for a lot of the things you're about, but, you know, this is a bridge too far. And that the Conservatives are the only possible hope of postponing or potentially walking this back at all. That if that, yes, ultimately both sides want to concentrate control and probably have the same sort of bipartisan agenda. But at least with the Conservatives, there's a bit more of a chance on this particular issue. And I would have to agree with that.
I agree with that too.
All right. Well, anyways, man, we've covered a lot of issues here. I think we've talked for about 2 hours. People can go and check you out on Twitter as well if they want to get more information.
I write every week on Substack. It's just Substack Tom Marazzo. It's pretty simple, right? I write a weekly article on many, many different things. One of which this week was about this shooter in BC.
Good stuff. Well, go subscribe to Tom's Substack. Thanks a lot for coming out, my friend. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
You take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.